This comment asks, can you help me on how I can stop my dog from lunging and barking at other dogs just walking by them on a walk? And then they shared a photo of their adorable dog. So the answer is yes, and also no. Yes, in that I am a certified dog behavior consultant and the owner of Best Life Dog Services, and I work exclusively with aggressive behavior and nervous system dysregulation. And many, probably most of my clients are reactive on leash. No, in the sense that I can't tell someone how to specifically address that behavior with only the information from a comment and within a 10-minute video. But I can share sort of a broad overview of the steps to take. So the first thing we want to do around any behavior concern is put into place management. Management prevents the behavior from getting worse. As the behavior is practiced, the behavior becomes more and more reinforced. It is happening for a reason that makes sense to the dog. And so each time they practice it, there's big internal reinforcement for what's happening, especially if the underlying emotion is fear or anxiety, because the dog survives the situation and there's nothing more reinforcing than that. Each time the behavior is practiced, we're also strengthening negative associations, whether that's fear and anxiety or frustration. Those negative associations are growing. And what that means is that we can expect over time for that behavior to become more intense, for the duration of the behavior to grow, and for it to take longer and longer for the dog to come back down from that stress response. We might see the behavior start to spread and generalize. You might see the dog reacting at smaller and smaller distances or to other things that they weren't reacting toward before. Management also helps to keep everyone safe. So it's going to keep everyone physically safe because this can be an unsafe situation. So the first step to any behavior modification plan is to manage the behavior, to avoid putting the dog in the situation where they are experiencing stress, distress, where they are experiencing these negative emotions, and where they are rehearsing these unwanted behaviors. For reactivity on walks, sometimes that means pausing neighborhood walks. Neighborhoods can be a hard place for dogs to walk. So it might mean instead going to sniff spots or going for decompression walks or going to local parks where you have more space. It's going to depend on what the individual dog needs, how much space they need, how many triggers they have. In the management section of our Google document, we have a whole post about getting outside with your reactive dog. Then we want to figure out the function of the behavior. Why is the dog reacting? Are they frustrated? Are they afraid? Are they dealing more broadly with anxiety? Are they overexcited and it's building up into kind of this overwhelm? Understanding why the dog is engaging in the behavior is key to addressing that underlying need and then altering the behavior. The behavior is a symptom. But one of the things we've been talking about a lot lately on here is holistic stress reduction and how it's vital to not just target the most problematic or most aversive to us behavior, but to really holistically look at the dog's stress levels. So for example, I might have a client come to me with the primary concern being reactivity on leash, but when we look a little further, we find that just going outside causes the dog distress. They shoot up the stress scale just going outside. And so the reactivity is a symptom of perhaps a broader anxiety disorder, for example. And if we just target that behavior and we don't look at the whole picture, the dog's anxiety disorder in that case, or hyperarousal or chronic pain issues, or whatever the case may be, our work isn't going to be as efficient, effective, or ethical as we want it to be. And so I really want to take a broad look at all the different areas where my dog is experiencing stress, where they're experiencing these big emotions. For some dogs, it may just be that presenting concern. For my client population, it is almost never that one presenting concern alone. And we have a lot of different playlists. The one on stress in dogs may be really helpful to learn how to understand when the dog is experiencing stress. We as humans tend to look at the more overt and distressing behaviors, and often those are on the much higher end of the stress scale. And then there are also some ways that dogs cope with stress, because behavior is really context specific, that can be misinterpreted by us, where the dog looks fine or they look excited, but really they're in high levels of distress. And so learning how to determine your dog's emotions and stress levels can be really helpful in taking that holistic look. And from there, once we understand how to best support the dog in that way, we can craft a plan. So if we have a dog who, let's say the dog is not dysregulated, they are not generally anxious, we are not seeing any big stressors in other areas of their life, they are just reactive on leash. And let's assume that this dog is getting enough sleep. Let's assume that this dog is not experiencing any pain or any underlying health conditions. And these are big ifs. These are really big ifs. So we want to look closely, but let's assume for the sake of our example here. Let's also assume that the dog's other enrichment needs are being met and met appropriately. So they're getting physical exercise, but they're not being over-exercised and having trouble coming down from high arousal activities. The dog has mental enrichment in a way that's not frustrating for them or boring for them. The challenge and the skill level are appropriately matched. And their social interactions, they feel safe and satiated, and they're not engaging in like a ton of like hyper-aroused play that's not really play, or trying to navigate tense conversations. And so social interactions are going well. And they have safety and security and independence and agency, and let's assume all of those things are checked off and in place. If the emotion is fear-based, if the dog is afraid of other dogs, and that's why they're barking and lunging and trying to create more space, we would want to do work to change that emotion, to help the dog feel safe and more positively about other dogs. It is normal for adult dogs to be dog selective or dog tolerant, so they don't need to be best friends with other dogs to live a fulfilled life. But we may want to change that emotion so they're not afraid of the other dogs, and we would want to build up self-regulatory skills so that when they do encounter other dogs out in the wild, and we're getting their stress levels down lower into a place where they can access coping skills, that they have coping skills to access. Some of this is going to be about us being able to hear our dog when they say, oh, I'm nervous about that and I'd like more space, and help facilitate that for them when they're on like a leash. And so we're increasing agency, we're teaching flight, we're building self-regulatory skills, we're building resilience to stress. Let's say that the dog is frustrated. They love other dogs. They get along with other dogs well in other contexts. And even if in the context on leash, they are excited to see other dogs, but their stress is getting up, so they're getting frustrated, and then they're going higher on the stress scale, and they're barking and lunging. Frustration is all about unmet expectations, right? And so first I'm going to double, triple, quadruple check that dog's social needs are satiated. For a lot of my clients, a lot of times in that position, their social needs aren't satiated because they actually can't handle the social interaction. They get like hyper aroused and have a really hard time. And so sometimes it's bringing those stress levels down so they can have those interactions so that we can reduce the frustration that they're experiencing when they see other dogs on leash. And I'm going to ensure that my dog isn't meeting dogs on leash in these settings, because I don't want to set that expectation and then have my dog be confused as to why they can't meet dogs sometimes, and that frustration grows. And I'm going to set up scenarios where my dog is under threshold, just like I would with fear, and work with them on alternatives, on self-regulation. We're going to build that resilience to stress. Other things that can be helpful in a lot of scenarios are using a longer leash, if it's safe to do so. Using a longer leash can really help with things like agency, with things like pulling on the leash, which can then increase stress as the dog is going. If there is pain in the body, it also allows the dog to move at a more natural pace that feels better to them in their body. Bringing along treats is almost never a bad thing. Occasionally we have to do some other work first if the dog is becoming incredibly hyper aroused by the food, or if there are some resource guarding things that are popping up in a way that could be tricky in that scenario. But most of the time, bringing along food can be really, really helpful. Helping the dog to self-regulate throughout the walk, through activities like sniffing, is really, really key. A lot of times folks will want their dog like focused on them and marching in a heel, and we're robbing the dog of the opportunity to self-regulate. We're going to dive into these 3 pillars: holistic stress reduction, self-regulation, and resilience at a deep level in our upcoming Behavior Bites webinar trio launching September 13th. And of course, we work with personal clients worldwide, so we'd be happy to help.